Okay. All right, hey everybody, welcome back to Karlson on the Roof, which is one of, again, as I said last time, my favorite childhood book that my mother read me. And today we're going to continue from chapter 3. Karlson plays tense. Smidge had a difficult few minutes. Mom didn't like her meatballs being used as ornaments, and she thought it was Smidge who decorated the tower so nicely like that, of course. Karlson on the roof, began Smidge, but Dad said sternly, "We'll have no more Karlson fantasies. Thank you, Smidge." Seb and Sally just laughed. "That," Karlson said, Seb. "Trust him to shove off just when we wanted to say hello." Smidge sadly ate the meatball and teddied his building bricks into their box. There was no point saying any more about Karlson just now, but things felt empty without him. Very empty. "Let's have coffee and forget about Karlson," said Dad, giving Smidge a comforting pat on the cheek. They always had coffee in front of the fire in the sitting room, and they did the same this evening. Although it was spring, light and warm, and lime trees in the street outside were sprouting little green leaves. Smidge didn't like coffee, but he liked sitting with Mom and Dad and Seb and Sally in front of the fire. "Shut your eyes a minute, Mom," said Smidge. Once Mom had put down the coffee tray on the little table in front of the open fire. "Why have I got to shut my eyes?" "So you don't see me eating sugar, of course, and I'm just going to take a lump," Smidge said. He had a very definite feeling that he needed something to comfort him. Why had Karlson gone off like that? You just couldn't do that. Vanish and leave nothing behind but a little meatball. Smidge sat in his favorite seat by the hearth, as near the fire as he could get. This after-dinner coffee time was almost the best bit of the day. You could talk to Mom and Dad, and they listened to what you said, which they didn't always have time to do otherwise. He liked listening to Seb and Sally too, the way they teased each other and talked about their studies. Studies were clearly very different and much posher than the little school Smidge went to. Smidge wanted to talk about his studies too, but nobody except Mom and Dad were interested in those. Seb and Sally just laughed in their annoying way, but it wasn't worth them trying to annoy him because he was a genius at annoying them back. You had to be if you had a brother like Seb and a sister like Sally. "Well, Smidge, how did you get on in class today?" Mom asked. That wasn't the sort of talk Smidge liked, but since Mom didn't say anything about the sugar lamp just now, he supposed he'd have to put up with her asking. "Fine, of course," he said grumpily. He couldn't stop thinking about Karlson. How could anyone expect him to remember anything about his schoolwork when he didn't know what had happened to Karlson? "What were you doing?" asked Dad. Smidge felt annoyed. Were they going to keep on like that? "That wasn't why you all sat relaxing round the fire together, to make people talk about their schoolwork." "The alphabet," Smidge said hastily. "The whole alphabet, and I know that. A comes first, and then all the other letters." He helped himself to another sugar lump and thought about Karlson again. They could chatter and buzz around him as much as they liked. Smidge kept thinking about Karlson and wondering if he would ever see him again. It was Sally who interrupted his reverie. "Smidge, are you listening? Do you want to earn 25 or pocket money?" It eventually sank in what she was saying. Smidge had nothing against earning 25 or, but it depended what Sally wanted him to do for it. 25 or is not enough," he said cockily. "Everything's so expensive these days. How much do you think a 50 or ice cream costs, for example?" I'm guessing here," said Sally knowingly, "but could it be 50 or?" "Yes, you're right," said Smidge. So you must see that 25 ore isn't enough. But you don't even know how you're going to earn it yet, said Sally. You haven't got to do anything, just not do something. What shall I not do? You won't show yourself in the sitting room this evening. Charlie's coming round, said Seb. Sally's new boyfriend. Smidge nodded. Aha, so that was the way they'd planned it. Mom and Dad were going to the cinema, and Seb was off to a football match, and Sally could sit cooing in the sitting room, and Smidge would be banished to his bedroom, all for the miserly sum of 25 ore. A fine family he had. What sort of ears has he got? Smidge asked. Do they stick out as much as your old boyfriend's ears? That was the way to get Sally annoyed. Hear that, Mum, she said. Now, do you see why I want Smidge out of the way? He scares away anybody I invite around. Oh, I'm sure he doesn't, Mom said weakly. She didn't like it when her children fought. She does, though. He does, though, Sally assured her. He scared away Pete, didn't he? He stood gaping at him for ages, and then he said, Sally doesn't like ears like that, So it's hardly surprising Pete never came back, as it is. Easy now, take it easy, said Smidge, in exactly the same tone of voice as Karlson. Easy now, take it easy. I will stay in my room and I'll do it for nothing. I don't want to get paid for people not having to see me. Great, said Sally. Let's shake on it. Shake on you not showing yourself all evening. Done, said Smidge. I'm not that keen on all your Charlies. In fact, I'd pay 25 ore to get out of seeing them. Sometime later, Smidge really was in his room, totally free of charge. Mom and Dad had gone to the cinema. Seb had made himself scarce, and if Smidge opened the door, he could hear a faint murmur from the sitting room. It came from Sally, who was in there talking with Charlie. Smidge opened the door a few times and tried to make out what they were saying, but he couldn't. So he went over to the window and looked out into the twilight. He peered down the street to see if Chris and Jemima were playing outside, but there were only a couple of big boys having a fight. It was pretty interesting, and he enjoyed it as long as the fight lasted, but sadly the boys soon stopped fighting, and then everything was boring again. Then he heard a heavenly sound. He heard the whir of a motor, and a second later, Karlson came sailing in through the window. Hasten Hobson, Smidge, he said casually. Hasten Hobson, Karlson said Smidge. Where did you get to? What do you mean? Asked Karlson. Well, you disappeared, didn't you? Said Smidge. When you were supposed to be meeting my mother and father, where did you go? Karlson put his hands on his hips and looked very cross. Huh, I've never heard anything like it, he said. Aren't I allowed to go and see to my house? A house owner needs to see to his house, doesn't he? Otherwise, where would we be? Can I help it if your mother and father want to pay their respects to me just when I'm busy seeing my own house? He looked around the room. Talking of houses, he said, where's my tower? Who's wrecked my lovely tower, and where's my meatball? Smidge began to stammer. I didn't think you were coming back, said Smidge anxiously. No, that's obvious, said Karlson. The world's best tower builder builds a tower, and what happens? Does somebody put a little fence around the tower and guard it to make sure it stays there forever? No, not on your life. They pull it down and wreck it. That's what they do, and eat up other people's meatballs. Karlson went over to a stool, sat down, and sulked. But surely that's a mere trifle, said Smidge, flicking his fingers the Karlson way. It's nothing to worry about. Easy for you to say, said Karlson indignantly. It's so easy to pull everything down, and then just say it's a mere trifle and there's an end to it. But what about me? I built that tower with these poor little hands of mine. He thrust his podgy hands under Smidge's nose. Then he sat back down on the stool and sulked worse than ever. Count me out, he said. Count me out if it's going to be like this. Smidge felt desperate. He stood there not knowing what to do. There was a long silence. In the end, Karlson said, If I got some little present, I might cheer up again. Can't be sure, but I might cheer up if someone gave me a little present. Smidge ran over to the table and started rummaging eagerly in the drawer because he had some very nice things in there. He had his stamps and his marbles and his colored crayons and his tin soldiers. And there was a pocket torch he was very fond of. "Would you like this?" he said, holding out the torch for Karlson to see. Karlson snatched it in a flash. "This is just the sort of thing it would have to be to cheer me up," he said. "It's not as good as my tower, but I can have it. But if I can have it, I shall try to cheer up a bit at any rate." "You can have it," said Smidge. "I suppose it works," Karlson said suspiciously, pressing the switch. And yes, the torch shone, and Karlson's eyes started shining too. "Just think, when I'm walking around the roof on autumn evenings and it's all dark, I can shine this and find my way home to my little house and not get lost among the chimney stacks," he said, patting the torch. Smidge felt very pleased to hear Karlson say that. He only wished he could go with Karlson one day on one of his roof walks and see him shine the torch in the dark. "Hasten hopson, Smidge. I've cheered up again now," said Karlson. "Fetch your mom and dad, and they can say hello to me." "They've gone to the movie theater," said Smidge. "Gone to the cinema? When they could be meeting me?" said Karlson in amazement. "Yes, Sally's the only one at home, with her new boyfriend. They're in the sitting room, and I'm not allowed to go in there." "What's that?" shouted Karlson. "Not allowed to go where you want? I won't let us put up with that for a single minute. Come on." "Yes, but I promise," said Smidge. "And I promise that if something's unfair, Hawkeye Karlson will be down on it just like that," said Karlson. "What exactly do you promise?" "I promise not to show myself in the sitting room all evening." "And you won't show yourself," said Karlson. "But I expect you'd rather like to see Sally's new boyfriend." "Well, yes, I would actually," said Smidge eagerly. "She had one before whose ears stuck out like jug handles. I want to see what sort of ears this new one's got." "Oh, yes, so do I," said Karlson. "Just give me a moment and I'll jiggery poke out something." The world's best jiggery poker, that's Karlson on the roof. He looked around the room. "That's it," he said, nodding. "A blanket. That's exactly what we need. I just knew I'd be able to jiggery poke out something." "What is it you've jiggery poked then?" asked Smidge. "You promised not to show yourself in the sitting room all evening, right? But if you're under a blanket, you're not showing yourself." "No, but," began Smidge. "If you're under a blanket, you're not showing yourself." "No buts," said Karlson firmly. "If I'm under a blanket, I'm not showing myself either. And Sally's only got herself to blame, since she's being so stupid. She won't get to see me, poor, poor little Sally." He grabbed up the blanket from Smidge's bed and threw it over his head. Come in," he shouted. "Come into my tent." Smidge crawled under the blanket while Karlson stood inside it, giggling smugly. "I don't expect Sally said anything about not wanting to see a tent in the sitting room. Everybody's always pleased to see a tent, aren't they? Especially one with a light shining inside," said Karlson, switching on the torch. Smidge wasn't so sure Sally would be all that pleased about the tent, but for himself he thought it was mysterious and exciting to be under the blanket with Karlson and the lighted torch. Smidge thought they'd be better off staying where they were and playing tense and not bothering about Sally, but Karlson did not agree. "I can't stand unfairness," he said. "I'm going into the sitting room, come what may." So the tent began walking towards the door. All Smidge had to do was shuffle along with it. A plump little hand stuck out to grasp the door handle and open the door very quietly and carefully. The tent moved out into the hall, which was only divided from the sitting room by a heavy curtain. "Easy now, take it easy," whispered Karlson, and without making a sound, the tent went gliding across the hall floor and stopped at the curtain. The murmur of voices could be heard a little more clearly now, but still not so clearly that you could make out any words. The sitting room light was turned off. Sally and her Charlie were obviously happy with the dim, dusky light from outside. That's good, whispered Karlson. It means the light of my torch will show up better. For now, at any rate, we had the torch switched off. Because we're going to be a nice surprise, whispered Karlson, beaming under the blanket. Slowly, the tent came gliding from behind the curtain. Sally and Charlie were sitting on the little sofa against the opposite wall. Slowly, the tent headed that way. I like you, Sally, Smidge heard a boy's voice say gruffly. How soppy he was, that Charlie. Do you? Said Sally, and it all went quiet again. The dark shape of the tent moved across the floor. Slowly and unstoppably, it headed for the sofa, getting closer and closer. Now it was only a few steps away, but the two of them sitting there saw and heard nothing. Do you like me, Sally? Said Charlie bashfully. He never got an answer, for just at that moment the light from a torch cut through the gray shadows of the room and hit him full on in the face. He leapt up, Sally screamed, and there was much giggling and a thudding of feet running hastily back towards the hall. You can't see anything when you've just been dazzled by a torchlight, but you can hear. And Sally and her Charlie heard the laughter, a wild, delighted laughter bubbling up over by the curtain. It's my horrid little brother, said Sally. I'll give him. Smidge giggled fit to burst. Of course she likes you, he shouted. Why shouldn't she? Sally likes all boys, so there. Then there was a crash and a bit more giggling. Easy now, take it easy, whispered Karlson as the tent toppled over into its wild flight to the door. Smidge took it as easy as he could, although the laughter was still bubbling inside him, and Karlson had fallen right on top of him, and he didn't really know which legs were his and which were Karlson's, and he knew Sally would get them at any moment now. They struggled to their feet as fast as they could and rushed to Smidge's room in total panic because Sally was right on their tail. Easy now, take it easy, whispered Karlson, his stumpy little legs pounding like drumsticks under the blanket. The world's best sprinter, that's Karlson on the roof, he whispered, but he sounded quite out of breath. Smidge could run pretty well too, and there was certainly no time to lose. At the very last second, they made it through the door to Smidge's room. Karlson quickly turned the key and stood there, looking pleased, sniggering silently as Sally hammered on the door. Just you wait till I get a hold of you, Smidge, shouted Sally angrily. But I didn't show myself all the same, shouted Smidge back, and more giggling came from behind the door. There were two people giggling. Sally could have heard that if she hadn't been so cross. That's the end of the story for today, and what happens next time, you'll find out on Friday at 4. So join me on Friday to hear the rest of the stories, and have a great day.